From the center of the universe, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, this is the SDM Show with your host, Rob Cairns. The SDM Show focuses on business, life, productivity, digital marketing, WordPress, and more. Sit back, relax, grab your favorite drink, and enjoy the show. Here is Rob.
Hey everybody, I'm Robert Cairns. I'm the founder, CEO, and chief creator of Amazing Ideas at Stunning Digital Marketing. In this podcast, I sit down with my good friend, Robert Rowley of PatchStack, and we talk all things security and WordPress security. Grab your drink, sit back and relax, and enjoy the conversation that Robert and I had. This episode of the SDM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. Hey everybody, Rob Cairns here. And today I'm here doing the podcast with my good friend Robert Rowley, who's the security advocate at PatchStack. How are you today, Robert?
Hi, I'm doing great today, and how are you?
Doing well. At the time of this record, it's baseball playoff season, so life is good in the city of Toronto, as we say. Yeah. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about security, a topic you know very well, I know very well. And I mean, we all know about the easy stuff. You know, use complex passwords, don't use admin, do your backups, make sure your backups can be restored. Well, in your opinion, what's the number one thing that website owners do not do security wise?
That's a good one. Well, you forgot to mention updates,
Yes,
but
of
I,
course.
I would put that as a second. To honestly, passwords just seem to be that problem that just keeps coming back. Those insecure passwords, but then those are individual users choosing bad passwords like pizza123 or whatever it may be.
Mhm. And what
Second to that, though, yeah, it's definitely is the updating, and that's more of a operations problem.
what I would tell you is all I've said to many clients over the years, you DIY'd your website, and when they get into trouble and they come to me, the first thing I look at is when was the last time you did an update? And I like to tell the story. I was looking at a prospective client who I was doing email stuff for, who I am no longer doing anything for due to a 96% email bounce rate, which we won't talk about. And he was doing an e-commerce site where he had 2,000 names. And what I'll tell you on his Woo site was his plugins, his WordPress version, and his updates were all 8 months out of date.
Mm.
And I said to him, "Why didn't you do these?" He said, "I don't need to."
Sure. Eventually, maybe he's hoping that somebody will break in and start updating the site for him.
Yeah. And he had customer data in it. So, I don't know what to tell people. And I did my due diligence and advised him and said, you should do this. And he said, I choose not to. And I said, okay, you're on your own because
Yeah.
frankly, I don't need my reputation tied to that issue.
Yeah. Well, that's something that happens in the security industry. That happens. You would be surprised at some of the large companies that accept that exact sort of scenario. They just simply accept the risk of not updating.
Yeah.
There's a policy and practice. There's a process for this too, and it's somebody's name gets put down on a piece of paper saying they are the ones that accept the risk. And then if something bad happens due to this behavior, right, this failure to update, then they look up that documentation, they see the paper trail, and they say, "Hey, here's who is responsible." Strangely enough, I think this week Uber's CISO or former CISO is now facing charges for behavior that was similar along these lines. It wasn't about updating, but it was about being the person responsible for security.
No, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I'm sure you read Hacker News on a regular basis, and I know I
Yeah.
read Hacker News on a regular basis. And every day there's some hack somewhere with some retail companies, some ransomware problems, some website problem. And, you know, I don't think it's a case of WordPress being secure or not secure. As Kevin Mitnick would have said in any of his books, the problem's the people.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the people are the problem for the insecure passwords, and the people are the problem for not clicking update when an update's available.
Yeah. And by the way, before you click those updates, please back up your site ahead of time so that if you
Yeah.
have a problem, you can do a rollback because
Yep.
there's issues with that.
Oh yeah.
We were talking before we went to air about PHP, and I
Hmm.
kind of want to address this issue because I was in a build meeting this morning with a bunch of Gutenberg builders doing modern WordPress with Brian Gardner. Those who don't know, Brian Gardner is one of the developer advocates up at WP Engine, and he has these what he calls FSE Roundtable Fridays, where we get together and talk about changes and full site editing. And one of the things I got into, we were talking about WordPress 6.1, and I said, be really careful here because WordPress 6.1 is going to be the first version of WordPress that's fully 8.x PHP compatible, but PHP 7.4 goes end of life at the end of November. What
Yep.
are your
Just a
thoughts
month
on
away.
that? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna start with how PHP developers and the team behind PHP communicated their uh, their end of life and end of support and end of security support. Now they've got a page on their website, php.net. It's supported versions. They've got a big list, and they can tell you every branch of PHP 7 all the way back to 7.0, which was end of life back in like 2019. They have 7.1, 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, 8.0, and 8.1. And they can clearly say that, yeah, we know in the past when the end of support was. We also can tell you in the future. We know we can tell you that 8.0, I have it up right now, it was released November 2020. It is actively supported, which just means, active updates to it until November 2022, and security support, which means security patches only until November 2023. This has been and this is the same thing for 8.1, which is actively supported until November 2023, and security support is planned until November 2024. So I think this is like the greatest way for operations people to know when to expect the updates to come, right? They know that they've got to get off of 7.4 and onto 8.0 technically in November, like next month. But
Yeah.
and this is it seems like a short period of time. But reality is this has been known for over a year. We already know that 8.0, you're going to have to get off of 8.0 and onto 8.1 because security support ends in November 2023. So you've got a whole year to revamp both your backends, right, the hosting infrastructure, as well as the code to accommodate for this. Now, there's also the extended support, right, which we could go into as well, but those are third parties who continue to provide security support for older PHP packages.
Yeah. And the one thing I would say, and we were talking about, is the issue with most WordPress devs and designers is have their plugin manufacturers or coders, have they got those plugins up to date? So
Yeah.
I'm in the middle right now. I run just over about 350 sites that I'm responsible for updating, and I'm already in the middle of doing testing to see what sites I'm going to have problems with and which ones I can move
Yeah.
now to save myself
Yeah.
issues. And I'm about halfway through that process. And I think I'm running about a 50-50 split right now on, what you
Hmm.
can do. And the way to check is to check your server logs and find out what's going on when you flip a site,
Yeah.
because
Errors.
the error messages will tell you.
Yep. Yeah. Uh, I'm just remembering too many times I've seen site owners not check their error messages and the error logs. So it's very common that when I worked at hosting providers, I go through the error logs and it's just like, well, here's the exact problem you're dealing with today, and here are 10 additional problems that you've not dealt with yet. Like they're all warning messages. Because a modern language, I do not know for sure if PHP does this, but I know I dealt with this when I was developing in Ruby. They'd have you warnings for depreciated function calls. I'm pretty sure PHP does the same. If you know that if your code is running a function and the name of the function is something that's going to be depreciated in the next release, where will that show up? How can the code tell the developer, hey, you need to change this from this function to that function? Well, they tell you right there in the error logs, but somebody has to be checking them. Somebody has to look.
Yeah, and even on a shared server, there are error logs that you can look at,
Yep.
and people don't realize that. So I think people need to learn to use the tools that are available to them.
Yeah.
Along the same lines of PHP, WordPress has made an announcement lately. They will no longer support some older versions. And I actually think that's a really good idea because
Yes.
the code base is so old, the security issues are so old. Do you have thoughts on that? Or
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I do not know what's the version that they're going back to.
I think anything 3x or 4x, they will not support.
Oh my goodness. Yes, they need to drop support for those. If that's,
Yeah.
oh no, you're talking about the WordPress version or the PHP version?
The WordPress core version.
Oh my. Okay, I thought you were talking about the PHP 3 and
No,
PHP 4,
no.
which is why I'm like, oh my. Yes, those are decades old. No, the WordPress versions, yeah, that's a great thing too. Mostly because those are the old versions that were still. I don't think they could run on modern PHP infrastructure, right? They would be running old, outdated versions of PHP, and I think it's common that I see a lot of code that supports PHP 5.6. And there's a big difference between PHP 5 and PHP 7, and there's security implications within those differences. I'm aware of vulnerabilities that are no longer being addressed, and they have a lot to do with object injection methodologies of attack. And those are just simply not patched in 5.0 or 5.x, I should say. And the 7.x versions is really where PHP changed how they handled objects when they're being instantiated within the code base to make it more secure. So, like circa like 2018, the whole PHP ecosystem got a lot more secure in how it handles objects that are being created within the code base. However, if you have a user ecosystem that's still supporting these 5.x, there's 5.6, and these older versions of PHP, all those new security updates don't help. And this is the same or similar for WordPress. All of the 3 point, I think it's 3.9, 4.0, 4.1 and 2, dropping support for those, officially dropping support for those. Well, shoot, how do I explain this? Officially dropping the unofficial support for those, because that's really that's like the truest way to explain that, is the best thing to do, because those site owners, they really need to get moved up. And if they refuse to, it needs to not be, like the WordPress community and those developers need to stop holding their hand and simply say, I'm sorry, but we can't continue to put in time backporting security fixes for you. And if you give me a second, I would love to explain why that complex chain of clarifications, why, but like dropping support for the officially unofficial supported versions of WordPress is the true statement. That's mostly because the official version of WordPress that's supported is only the most recent release, right? So that's 6.1 now, right? Or 6, oh, it's almost 6.1. It's
6.0.2 at the time
6.02.
of this record. 6.1 comes
Yeah.
out on November the 1st.
Yeah. 6.02 is the only official current release. And the moment 6.1 comes out, 6.1 will be the only officially supported release. However, practically speaking, like in actual, like how the real world work and how the ecosystem really, what the support they do provide, they're providing something called security releases. The security releases go all the way back to, well, it was 3.9. And I commented on this a few times during the Patch Stacks Weekly saying, this is actually quite surprising and amazing, and it's something great this community does. They have security backports for over 10 years of software versions. However, the official word from WordPress.org is only the most recent version is supported. So it's really kind of confusing And that's why I have to make this really weird phrase of the only officially supported, unofficially supported like version of WordPress situation.
Yeah. So it's so true, and it's worth mentioning that. And I don't know. Like I've played around with the betas for 6.1, and I'm not sure at this point how much of it is going to be a feature release and how many security patches they'll throw in there. Probably not many. It'll probably be
Yeah.
a six. Typically, it'll be a 6.1.1, or which will come a week later or 2 weeks later with all the security stuff. That's
Yeah.
typically. And
You're right on it there. Yeah. That's how they
yeah,
do it. They do the major releases with features and they don't sneak in security releases on the major ones. But of course, a couple weeks later, a security release what tends to pop up.
yeah. And we were talking about 0 days. It's interesting. Out of the WordPress community, one of the biggest 0 days running around right now is a Microsoft Exchange 0 day. That
Yes.
it just has keeps ruling its ugly head all of a sudden,
Yeah.
and I don't know why. Knowing Microsoft, why they haven't patched this one? To be honest with you, it seems to be keep going and going and going.
Yeah, well, some researchers found a lot of stuff I remember about 2 or 3 years ago in Exchange, and I think
Yep.
this is kind of connected to those. I believe the original research was, funny enough, object injection related, but because object injection attacks are not PHP specific, they're in Java, they're in C, Hash, or whatever Exchange is developed in, and yeah, it's just a weird little different way of accidentally writing a security bug.
So true. I have a saying in my business, and that is your web hosting company has to be your partner. And I stress the word partner in security, not a vendor you employ. What do you think about
Mm.
that? I think some hosts do security layers better than other hosts. Do you have any feeling?
Yeah. Oh, I like that quote. Yeah, because they've got being a partner with it is like, yeah, like they're willing to help you out. And when I worked at hosting providers, I don't think I've ever tied the security services I developed for those hosting providers to product. So it was never charged for security. And it was always just security is just what's given, mostly because it's beneficial for everyone. You can't leave a hacked site there and try to hold it hostage with the customer saying you need to pay us an additional $500, $600 to clean up your hacked site, right? You just like fix it, right? Because that's the
Yeah.
right thing to do. Just fix the hacked site, tell the customer what they need to do. Tell that you can even probably inform them there's more they need to do, right? Like you need to change your passwords, make sure you do updates, make sure you have backups, double check everything, make sure everything is still clean because this was this was a security service provided for free. Feel free to hire a third party auditor, but the hosting provider saying, oh, you got to try pay extra for security is a big deal in security industry. In fact, there's an ongoing list somebody does where they call out online services who only offer two-factor authentication on premium plans, right?
Wow.
Like you literally have to pay them extra to do two-factor auth, which is super easy and it can be implemented for free. Um, they just have to take the time to update their auth form, and yet they're like, no, if you want two-factor auth, if you want to secure your account, pay us more money. It's where it misses the mark, and that's when security marketing kind of can clearly conflict.
Yeah. And as somebody in the space, personally, I suggest that people turn on two-factor authentication. The new
Absolutely.
authenticator apps, like the Google Authenticator app, is really easy to use. I use it and the Microsoft one. I
Yeah,
was sharing with you, I just got a new phone recently, and the transfer of those authenticator apps to the new phone was easy peasy, wasn't hard,
nice.
with the right credentials.
Yeah, it's a
I,
process. So
it,
you should share with everybody what that process is because they've got to remember you can't just go out and buy a new phone and trade in your old phone and before you do the authenticator app swap.
yeah, what I did actually was I wanted to make sure when I started working with the new phone, I had everything in one place. So I actually grabbed my Android tablet. And people say, why would you do that? Because I decided I wanted my authenticator apps in another place as a backup in case something happened. So I grabbed my Android tablet. I loaded both the Microsoft and the Google Authenticator on the Android tablet. So that gets the apps on there. Then I went back to my phone, which at the time was a Pixel 4a, and Google is really easy. It lets you bring up a barcode internally in the app, and then all you do is take the new location and scan it. And once you
Mhm.
scan that barcode, it imports all your authentication stuff. In my case, it's like over 150. It's unreal. Now, I only use the Microsoft Authenticator for Microsoft apps because it works a little better. What you do in the Microsoft side is you make a backup to your Microsoft account of what's in your Authenticator app. And then when you run the app the first time on the new device, it says, do you want to restore from a backup with this account? You say yes, and it imports it all in. The process really, if you do it right, it takes a couple minutes per app.
Yep.
So
Yep.
when I got my Pixel 6a, I just repeated the process. I wiped the 4A. So I've totally wiped that phone. I've actually sent it to my brother out west, so I had to wipe it. And I've now got my Authenticator apps on my Android tablet and on my 6A so that if something goes wrong, I've got it in another location as well.
Perfect.
And, along that, I also use a password manager. So I'm a big believer that passwords should be strong and complex. We talked about that, not in a
Hmm.
dictionary. So
Hmm.
my password manager choice for about the last couple of years has been Bitwarden, which is open source. I pay
Hmm.
for it because I want to support what they're doing.
Good.
And what I do with Bitwarden is every couple months I export a password list. Yes, I know, on a piece of paper, but that password list goes into an envelope, which goes into my safe that says if you need something and I'm not in a position to help you, i.e., I'm sick in the hospital and so on,
Hmm.
here is my entire password list. Open this envelope.
That's good.
And it's something I think that business owners and even personal users don't think about. What happens to my passwords if I die tomorrow or if I
Yeah.
get incapacitated?
Yep.
And all my family knows that password list is right next to my will and they know how to get
Hmm.
at it. So
Hmm.
that's really important.
Yeah, that's an important thing. Definitely securing it, having a good home safe, and actually get to use your home safe for something good besides just copies of your birth certificate and social security cards and stuff.
And passports. Yep.
Passports. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And so I think that's really important. Um, I also think, and we were talking a little bit, I'm about to start working remotely. And I'm in the process. I'm going to be building out a new laptop, which will be a
Hmm.
Windows laptop, high end. And then I'm going to remote to a Linux box that's located in my home residence. So when I'm out, I'm instead of VPNing from my Windows
Hmm.
box to where I need to go, I'm actually going to VPN home to my Linux box and then go out back that way.
Nice. Yeah.
And one of the reasons I'm going that way is for security. The other reason I'm going that way is if I'm in the middle of a large file transfer and I'm on a Wi Fi connection that doesn't want to behave,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't lose that transfer in the middle.
Yep.
Um, do you have any thoughts on me doing that? Am I overkilling? Am I underkilling?
No, I think you have a good use case. That's the best. That's the biggest thing. You're only overkilling if your use case doesn't match what your tech stack is capable of. And your use case is the biggest one there was, yeah, what if you're on your laptop and you've got to download a backup, right? Maybe your clients, right, need a site update, and the right thing to do first is do a backup first. But
Mhm.
they've got 50 gigs of data, or even 20 gigs could be a little bit much. 10 gigs could be too much on some hotel Wi-Fi networks. And what if you've got to go get dinner or something? You're going to leave your laptop sitting there and hope that the Wi-Fi doesn't drop during the middle of the transfer, and then you got to start it all over again. So using a server that's back at home that you're just VNC type connecting to is a great way to do it. Now, I know you know security, network security stack, but perhaps the other listeners don't. You got to be really conscious and aware of not just opening the port with your firewall. That's not a VPN, right? I'm sure that you're doing an actual proper VPN where you got
I am.
authentication before you can start VNCing to that local server. Another way, there's a few apps that do this now. One that I'm familiar with that I've set up myself is Cloudflare has something called Argo tunnels, and those Argo tunnels can open up an a port on an internal box that's not accessible to the internet, and you have to traverse through Cloudflare's not authentication, but basically, yeah, they'll have an authentication layer before they allow you to connect to that server that's inside of a network, which is quite funny. This is the same thing attackers do to get persistence in connections, right? Like
Mhm.
they'll open up a port internally and they do an auth protocol between the two, where the process running on the local server that's hidden behind the network is the one that like gets authenticated and then allows connections in. And this is all done without having to open up a network port, and you don't even have to have a VPN portal open. It's all kind of handled in the background. So doing something, as long as you're doing something to secure that sensitive box that's behind the VPN for your case, or behind an Argo tunnel, or basically it's not publicly accessible. You got an authentication later before somebody accesses it, then it's perfect because you'll be able to log in, get past the authentication layer, get past the VNC layer of a login as well, and then you can start the process, and that process will run on that local system.
No, no, I do that, and the other thing I do, and you and I've talked about before many times, because this is a business. For high end stuff, I actually have a custom script that runs. So all my backups go to the cloud. It takes the backups and copies them to a local Synology NAS server, and then which is RAID 5. And then I have
Mhm.
another NAS server in another location. And Synology has this cool software that lets you just say, sync my two NAS servers in the middle of the night. So it just goes
Nice.
about and syncs my two NAS servers. So backups are key that people need to realize. Having the original one other copy is not sufficient. You need multiple copies in
Yeah.
multiple places, preferably off-site. And I got to stress that because there's been people who've had house fires or thefts. And what did
Hmm.
the thieves do? They steal the backup drive that's next to the computer.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Those things are not cheap either, right? They won't even care about the data on that drive. They'll just plug it in, do a factory reset, and boom, everything's gone.
yep, yep.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
that is so key.
Offsite.
So we talked a little bit about that. One of the things I'd like to put out to the listeners is what they should do if you want a quick security synopsis every week is make sure you listen to the Patch Stack Weekly. Give
Mhm.
Robert's weekly roundup a little plug. It's usually 10 or 15 minutes of great security info. It's a
Mhm.
podcast available on most platforms, certainly on Pocket Casts. So that's where I listen to it, and you try and talk about whatever's on your mind and what's happened during the week.
Yep.
I think it's
Yeah.
really important.
Yeah, every week is a little weekly knowledge share. So there's something for everyone to learn. And if that week's knowledge share isn't quite in your arena, maybe next week's will be a bit different. I've gone all over the spectrum of security topics.
Yep. And I think, and you also identify like two or three plugins that have major security issues, and
Yeah.
that is one of my sources for staying up to date. I always say to people, find people smarter than you,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
there's them, there's you, there's certainly iThemes does a really good job on their Wednesday roundups.
Yeah.
Security generally does a good job. Now they cover more than just the WordPress space. I think their last email was all about Joomla updates,
Cool.
and certainly the folks over at WP Scan, which is an automatic company, do a pretty good job at covering. So I think you gotta, if you're gonna want to stay up to date with security, there's a couple really good sources out there. So
Yeah. Yeah, especially the good ones that are nice and brief. And I also love whenever I can kind of talk about how a vulnerability is not really a severe or critical issue, even though like some of the communications has gone bad. Those have been the topics of prior weeklies, and I think even this week's weekly, I get to talk about, oh, like this one sounds bad, it's unauthenticated, but there's these extra things that you like aren't being clearly communicated. Like you need this extra thing, which means it's not actually a huge risk.
No, it's true. And
Yeah.
you got to realize that just because a vulnerability is out there, is it a 1 to 10 or is it a 10 on a 10 to 10? I mean,
Yeah.
there is a difference in complexity,
Yep.
and people hear the word security vulnerability and they jump. And I sometimes get really upset at mainstream tech journalists. They'll write an article and they'll say, "Oh, here's another security problem. We have WordPress." No, no, no.
Yeah.
Microsoft patches their operating system on Patch Tuesday every month
Yep.
without failure. And they're not doing that to Microsoft. So I think the key is in security, and you and I have had this conversation, is who do you trust?
Yep. Yeah. It's
And
definitely all about that trust. Yeah, but and how you build that trust too is by wording it different. The communication needs to be different. When these journalists say security bug or they say vulnerability in WordPress, really it's a security bug that was patched in a plugin. Big difference in those two phrases.
yep, I would agree. Uh, what's going on up at PatchStack? You guys have a wonderful dashboard that you can
Yep.
use. I am a PatchStack user far and bright. You start off with a free plan, so if somebody's got a couple sites and they want to give it a spin, they can go there and do that.
Yep.
Um, you've got really good communication. I know every Monday or Tuesday an email goes out about the weekly. I've
Yep.
I've probably, knowing me, I've listened to it by then. It's kind of one of those things when it pops up in my podcast catcher, it hits the playlist pretty quick.
Yeah.
What else are you doing up there?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the big one, right? We've got this plugin which is connects to our app dashboard, which gives site owners, even at the free level, a nice little what I call security operations center. You can put in all your websites, and you're going to get in a dashboard where you can see the health of the security of those components that are installed on every one of those WordPress sites.
Mhm.
Aside from that, though, we take this, and all of this is powered by the intelligence, which is part of our patch stack database, which you can view at patchstack.com/database. And that's really just a fire hose of every new vulnerability or security bug that's being patched. And what's really cool about those, if you look closely, there's some little red flags and little green flags. That identifies if there's a patch available for that or not. So there's a little red flag next to a security bug that we're reporting. That means that we've reported it to the developer and we've gotten no response back. Typically, you'll also go to the WordPress.org plugins repository, and you'll notice that those plugins are tend to also be marked closed due to either no reason or no official reason, or after about a month, they finally clarify, yeah, there was a security bug that was not patched. So they no longer want to distribute those plugins. So those little red flags are great little key bits of insight. Another thing that we started adding is if you look closely, sometimes there's a little, I think it's a radar or basically a little flashing notice, and we're starting to communicate when we're seeing active attacks against these security bugs in popular plugins. I
Yep.
think that's a wealth of information. And we take all this intelligence that we have, which is more than just a list of which plugins are vulnerable. It has that information about if there's a patch available. It has that information about if it's being actively exploited. And we're partnering with hosting providers. Uh, One big one this week was one.com
Mhm.
and all of their subsequent brands underneath them. They're now going to start integrating our patch tech intelligence into their services. Another big announcement, which was last month, just before WordCamp US, was Hostinger, and they're a EU-based host, but they're starting to use their intelligence as well. Again, we're working with the hosts so that the hosts can notify their customers. We're also working directly with site owners, and we're working with agencies like yourself, right? When a site owner doesn't have a hosting provider that's helping them out with security, or even if the site owner can't do the security, the updates, and all that work themselves, then they should be hopefully working with an agency that can use a tool like PatchStack's app to let them know, hey, this is a critical security vulnerability on this website. You should probably be, putting some of your time aside today to work on this right away. Or, there's a security bug, it's medium, but so take some time this week to do it.
Yeah, and the other place I've seen it recently is you have a partnership with the WordPress toolkit in cPanel.
Yeah.
I've certainly seen the links in there when vulnerabilities come up on certain sites, and
Yeah.
and it points back to a patch stack. And then the last place worth mentioning is follow the patch stack Twitter ID, because your team tweets out the vulnerabilities on Twitter on a regular basis.
Yes. Patchstack app on Twitter. Also, Haku. I think there's an underscore at the end of Haku
Yeah, I think
on Twitter as well. Haku is the one that always talks about the vulnerabilities and the security bugs.
I actually have those two apps right in their own Twitter list, so I don't miss them, believe it or not.
Nice.
So yeah, so
Nice.
there's all kinds of good sources, and if people are having problems, Robert's pretty approachable. You can reach out and say to him, "Hey, what do you think I should do? Can you guide me?" If
There you go.
somebody wants to do that, how's the best way to reach out to you, Robert?
You can reach out to me if you're on post status. I'm usually there. I'm Robert R on post status. And on Twitter, you can reach out to either the Patchstack app or try to hit up Haku, or you can just reach out to me. My Twitter handle is IamLei, Lei. So it's IamLei on Twitter. And you can just message me and see what's up. And I always love to help. So if you got a problem and it's a discussion or a short one, I can always help. But I'm not going to build you a whole security infrastructure.
No. Robert, it's been great. Thanks for sharing your knowledge as always, and you have a wonderful day and a great weekend.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
This episode of the STM Show is sponsored by Stunning Digital Marketing, the agency to handle all your WordPress website security needs. Go on over to stunningdigitalmarketing.com and find out how we can help you secure your website so you no longer have an issue with backups, being hacked, or your website being compromised. That's stunningdigitalmarketing.com. A very special thank you to Robert for joining me on this edition of the SDM Show. Thank you for listening to this edition of the SDM Show. The SDM Show is brought to you by Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing. For more information about Rob Cairns and Stunning Digital Marketing, go to stunningdigitalmarketing.info. From here, you can connect to us on social media, go to our website, and even go to the podcast to subscribe. This podcast is dedicated to my late father, Bruce Cairns. Dad, I miss you very much. Keep your feet on the ground. Keep reaching for the stars. Make your business succeed.